The Winchester Repeating Arms Company was one of the earliest to manufacture a repeating rifle, and as such, the Winchester name has become synonymous with lever-action firearms. The gun is colloquially known as the gun that won the West. Ralph had an old Winchester that had been in the family for years. As a boy, his father would wait for Ralph's grandparents to leave so that he could sneak the rifle out of the house for target practice. Now, generations later, the old Winchester fired just fine, but part of the repeater mechanism had worn so that spent shells weren't ejected by the lever and had to be removed manually. Ralph's grandson Don was a machinist by trade, so someone suggested that Ralph ask his grandson whether or not the gun could be repaired. In short order, Don had manufactured a new part from steel, and the Winchester was working like new. Ralph was quite impressed and told Don that he wanted him to have the gun when he died. Maybe someone in the family knew of Ralph's bequest of the Winchester rifle to his grandson Don, but it was only a verbal promise, made at least in part to praise a job well done. At any rate, aside from that promise, Don wouldn't be in line to inherit the Winchester, which had a rich family history. You might have heard of Ralph, but you're more likely to have heard of Don, who was multi-talented and quite creative. He was involved in various enterprises, rubbed shoulders with a few of the rich and famous, and founded the leading radio station in all of Mexico. But the rest of the story is about Ralph. Years after his grandson had repaired Ralph's Winchester rifle, Ralph was at home, in ill health, and very weak. Death was imminent, and the family had been called in. Ralph collapsed and was helped to the floor, his unseeing eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. Finally, when it was evident that Ralph was totally unresponsive, the undertaker was called. Family members decided that Ralph's body shouldn't be left on the floor, so they lifted him onto the bed. When they did, they heard a sound from Ralph. And then Ralph spoke. He asked if Don was there. Don was right there at his bedside. Ralph said, "You thought I was a goner, didn't you?" Then told Don, "I want you to have the gun." And then, having passed the old Winchester on to the 5th generation of the family, Ralph died. I mentioned that you might have heard of Ralph because if you can hear my voice, you may have been his neighbor. You see, he lived all his life in Akron, Indiana. His grandson, who was a machinist and an engineer and a professional photographer, founded 88.9 FM in Mexico, Indiana. Donald Eugene Gene Wittenberger. I'm Scott Harleman for 88.9 FM. Now you know the rest of the story.